Hi, everyone. I just wanted to welcome everyone to the event today. My name is Ingrid Scholes. I'm the Vice President of Membership for ACRGNY. We're so thrilled to have so many participants, and I just wanted to do a quick plug for ACRGNY membership. Um, Being a member helps support all of the events that we do. It also gives you early and easy access to knowing about upcoming events we might have. And separately, I wanted to give a very special thank you to ADR Notable, Dispute Resolution Management Made Easy. ADR Notable is ACRGNY's 365 sponsor this year. We've been so pleased to partner with them, and we've been so grateful for their support. They help neutrals and firm administrators at every step of the dispute resolution process. And if you are an ACRGNY member, you can access 20% off the listed annual or monthly fee for ADR Notable. So thank you very much to ADR Notable, and welcome to the event today. Without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to Gary Doernhoefer. And thank you very much, Gary, for being here.
Thanks so much for the kind introduction. I appreciate it, and it's great to be with this organization. It's one of the more vibrant groups that I work with throughout the year. You guys get great attendance. You do put on great programs. It's really definitely a leader in the industry among the professional organizations. I'm also delighted today to be with our two additional guest speakers here, Noam Ebner and Alyson Carrel. If you've been around this business at all, you know both these names. They do a lot of public speaking. They have contributed an awful lot to the scholarship of the field as well. And that's kind of what we're really here to talk about, because 5 years ago, there was a paper published by these two authors, co-authors, entitled "Mind the Gap, Bringing Technology to the Mediation Table." And I 5 years ago, let's think about that for just a pause for a moment and think about how much foresight went into publishing a paper with that title 5 years ago in this profession. And it was particularly exciting for me because when I read the paper, I was busy trying to build ADR Notable, which was pretty much exactly what the paper was about. So we forged an immediate relationship and have been, fondly complimenting one another ever since, I think. So I don't know, Noam, do you want to just do 2 minutes on your own background, and Alyson, you want to do the same in just a minute? So on my screen, Noam, you're top right, so we'll go that direction.
Okay, I want to do a whole lot less than 2 minutes, though, if that is okay. Hi, all. I'm Noam Ebner. I've been doing negotiation, mediation, conflict resolution for the past 20 plus years. For a long period, I was a professor at Creighton University and at a bunch of other places. Now I'm out there in the field again, trying to figure out what my next move is, including some looking into what opportunities and what horizons there might be outside of academia in training, in practice. And so coming back to this article, which is essentially a practice-oriented piece, is right on time and right on band for me right now at this point. It's so wonderful to be here. Gary, thanks for bringing us together, and to ACI Greater New York, who I haven't been at one of your conferences for about 10 years, but it's so wonderful to participate in all the roundtables. I love this group. Thank you.
Alyson?
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Noam. I'm Alyson Carrel, and so I'm at Northwestern University School of Law in our Center on Negotiation, Mediation, and Restorative Justice. We name them all. And like Noam, I've been working in this field for over 20 years. I started as a small claims court mediator in the Florida courts while in undergrad, and then was running a court program before going to law school. Then I went to law school and really only went to get the credentials. So I'm one of those individuals who, like Noam, started before law school, really have a passion for this field that runs deep and long. And I share that just to say that when we wrote this article, it comes from a place of love, care, and desire to ensure that our field is able to do what we think and promise that we are able to do. So we'll get into it, but I just wanted to say that. Thanks, Gary.
Great. Okay, so just really quickly, there's an obvious format or structure to this, very loosely. We're going to start with whatever in the world these folks were thinking back in 2019, or actually a little before that, that led to actually drafting, to authoring this article. And then we'll come forward to, okay, so how did it go when it was released? What was the reaction? And then we'll come into today and say, well, so looking back on publishing that article from today's perspective, how do you think you did in terms of prediction? What did you not expect to see? What did you expect to see? How are we? And then we'll spend a little bit of time getting folks to think for the future, given all the things that are moving around in technology in the field right now, like AI. That's not a small question, but we'll spend a little bit of time on it. I do want to say there are a lot of people on this program today, which is terrific. It's exciting to see the interest in the topic. In order to manage questions, if you can just drop them into the chat, I think two, maybe all three of us, and somebody from ACRGNY are all monitoring the chat. We'll try and work those questions in as we see them, so that we get everybody's question answered without disrupting too much what's going on. So with that, as an intro, I want to start kind of where I just mentioned. What did the two of you see as you looked at the profession of dispute resolution prior, to 2019? I don't know how long it takes to actually publish an article, but I assume that takes a little while. So you're probably thinking about this even earlier than 2019 when it finally came out. So what did you see? What did the world look like, and what prompted you to write, an article that is kind of a little bit of an admonition or warning, even by its title? I'll let either one of you start. It doesn't matter which one it is.
Noam, do you want to start in, because I feel like in some ways it started with your negotiations changing article in some ways.
Okay, I could go there. So I had been working in the realm of technology and dispute resolution since the early 2000s. I had planned to write a PhD on it. That went south real quickly. I practiced it. I was living overseas in Israel and trying to participate professionally in whatever was going on across the ocean. So ODR was a natural avenue for me to work on. And as I was working on technology, but also on mediation as an old school mediator, just as Alyson has described, I started to notice that actually two things are happening side by side. One is that technology is developing, and that people are becoming more able to replicate processes online and to conduct all sorts of businesses online, and that we're becoming more comfortable with communication online, and that we're learning new ways of fighting online and making up online, and that all of that is developing. And alongside the technological aspect of that and the behavioral science aspects of that, there's also this notion that as people continue to live in this technologized world, ever technologized world that we're living in, so sure, we're using technology, we're putting it to use, but it is also changing us. And so we are changing as people in the way that we act, that we interact, which of course is very important for mediation, the ways that we can communicate, in the ways that we think about things, in the way that we perceive others and the world. And I could go on, but there's an even longer article on that. The point being that conflict resolution and negotiation studies have largely seen humans as a constant. Sure, we change throughout our lives. There's, developmental psychology and all that, but generally speaking, people are people. And so you can write a book like Getting to Yes about how people are or how people should do it, as if 30 years later that piece will still be relevant, because people don't fundamentally change, as people. In the technological age, that's no longer true. And so these two things are sort of going side by side. So I've been looking at things that happen along both of those lanes. How are we changing as a result of technology? And also, how are our parties changing as a result of technology and all that? But also, how are our capacities changing with technology. And in that focus of how our capacity is changing with technology, what can we do with technology? So working on ODR and on on online negotiation, I saw many cycles of adoption of technology. Okay, so remember when email came along and people said, no, we would never negotiate via email. Probably they said the same thing about the phone, although I wasn't there for that. And then, 5 years later, everybody's negotiating via email, but no, we would never negotiate anything important or mediate anything via video conferencing. And the same for text messaging or Slack or whatever it is. And the cycle is very familiar and it's very, and so I've been mapping and following those cycles as well, and sometimes trying to shorten them. And sort of that's the point that brought me to explore and to notice what is going on with the mediation field in terms of adoption of technology. Where are we? What are we doing? There is this thing called ODR. There is this thing called in the room mediation. What's going on sort of between those two things? What I found there kind of surprised, well, not surprised me, but it was eye-opening. And at this time, Alyson and I started speaking about this and about other ideas that she had.
Passing, okay. And so around 2019, yeah, I started talking to Noam because I was in this weird position as assistant dean of law and technology at Northwestern, which was an odd appointment for me because I'm not a technologist. I hadn't been studying this for 20 years like Noam, but I was very active in seeking out education technology and how to use it in the classroom to engage students. And so through this appointment at the law school, I had the opportunity just to go to so many talks and conferences about what was happening in the legal technology and innovation space. And I was inspired because here are all of these legal technologists, just technologists, lawyers who had also started moving in this direction. And these are the people that we being the ADR field, set aside. They don't know what we do because we really focus on the people behind the problem. So if they're lawyers, they're just too focused on the case and whether or not the claim can be made, and we're trying to go deeper to interests. If they're technologists, all they want is the zeros and ones and efficiency, and they don't understand the heart of the matter. That's what I grew up hearing, at least, I'll just say. And then I go to these conferences and presentations, and that's not what I'm hearing at all. I am seeing people come forward and say, there's a problem, and we need to think creatively about how we're going to solve it. I know that language. When we look at the problem, let's look at it in this place of curiosity and try to understand what's happening with our clients, if they were lawyers, or the users, if they're technologists, and really trying to think more deeply about why these problems were arising. I was like, I speak that language too. That's positions versus interests. And I thought I was going to go into this space being completely out of water and not understand and not fit in. And very quickly realized that our field fits in just fine. And in fact, we're very much aligned. But when I then went back and reflected on the dispute resolution field, I was still hearing all of this. We can't use technology. This is a lesser process if we use technology. There's no human element to technology. And I just started talking to them like, what is happening? Why is this happening? We have to do something about this because there's an opportunity for us in so many ways. There's an opportunity for us to grow and thrive because of the way that people were thinking and being forward problem solvers and creative and how they are innovating in the legal space, but also because that same motivation that had me thinking about how to use technology to engage students in the classroom still existed with dispute resolution. Like, how do we engage the users of dispute resolution more effectively, given what Noam had been talking about in his Negotiations to Changing article? Technology is all around us. It's how we operate. It's how we communicate. And in the classroom and in dispute resolution, we were saying it has no place. And I was just like, this doesn't make sense. That it has to have a place because it literally is on us at all times. So we started talking about this, and that's when I think we were like, let's go ahead and write this paper.
So, okay, so I'm hearing a couple of themes here that I want to drill down into, and this comes a little bit from our session yesterday to get ready for this. So, when we talk about technology in this field, we at least from my perspective, it kind of breaks into, there's communications technology that you ran through, text messaging, email, voice, video conference. But then there's a bunch of technology, frankly, like ADR Notable, which helps with all of the administrative tasks. And it, really, we approached it almost like, look, the human stuff is the human stuff, and maybe technology isn't ready for that yet, or maybe people aren't ready to have technology come into that. So let's just help them with all the administrative stuff that everybody's more comfortable with technology addressing. But you guys are not; those aren't the things you're talking about. So I want to make sure that we contrast with your vision about that with kind of the world that otherwise might be what people perceive. So help us out with what examples of what's the technology that you're trying to get people to really think harder about.
So sort of to preface to that, I'll just sort of summarize 50 pages or whatever the article was. Nobody has to actually go out and read it. Yeah, there's a link in the chat, but here's the we explored what technology is being used in the negotiation room, and we explored sort of more broadly what technology is being used in the mediation room, and what technology is being used by mediators at all. And what we discovered is basically the following: is that some mediators there is technology being used for administration. Let's call it everything sort of case management-y. Okay, those were developing in the mid-teens, 20-teens. And then there was that sort of, and then there was other technology that was being used for practice support, like mediators having websites, advertising through websites, putting their names on online rosters and things like that. But when you looked at the mediation table, okay, when you looked in the mediation room, as I think we wrote in the article, the most advanced, evolved piece of technology you'd find there was a whiteboard. And you simply would not find anything else in the room. Beyond that, we tell people to turn their phones off and be in the bubble, right? So sometimes we're even aggressively denying technology in the room. And so that was one thing that we noticed. And the second thing we noticed is that we were receiving a lot of answers when speaking with mediators, like what technology do you encounter in mediation? So people would say, well, what are you talking about? There are those people out there who are using Zoom and stuff for mediation, right? Because they would point to the field of ODR and say, oh, the guys dealing with online dispute resolution, well, they're replicating processes via Zoom. And that's when we identified what we called the gap, and that's what we called the article is about, is that there's wholly online mediation being replicated via Zoom. So there's sort of using technology for communication support. There's using technology for administrative support or practice support. But in the room, mediation is a technologically bereft process, practice, room, whatever you want to experience. And we saw some dangers in that and some opportunities for it to improve. So that's sort of the general context. And then the rest of the article sort of explains, so what types of technology might be helpful, what points in the process might it be helpful to incorporate technology. And remember, this is we're writing this in 2018, let's say, which is a whole world ago, as I'm sure we'll get into soon. And Alyson, do you want to jump on that?
Well, yeah, I think as you were talking, I was just realizing, well, first of all, we knew that in 2018, there had been others that had noticed some of these things and had tried to call attention to that gap. So whether it was David Larson and calling it, wasn't it TADR, technology assisted dispute resolution or something, trying to move us away from this limited vision of technology and mediation. But those efforts had didn't feel like they had called enough attention yet to the mediation tools that people had beyond using it for email, video conferencing as a way to do mediation, that communication intermediary. That is a great use of technology, but we are really trying to shine a spotlight on all of those other uses. So Noam, you mentioned the practice management, and do you want to share that concentric circle
I'll look
thing?
for that while you keep going on.
Okay, all right, yeah, because I know you put it in the chat and then it was gone for me at least. But so this idea that we saw what people were doing in administrative pieces. So some of this, like the outside circles that Noam just put in chat for everybody, we knew that people were using it as that communication intermediary, and that's where everybody focused on whenever we mentioned technology and mediation. There had been others who had tried to call attention to the use of technology beyond that, but again, we just didn't think it had gotten enough. So we wanted to put as many examples in this article as possible, maybe to inspire folks like what this actually looks like, so that we can move beyond hearing technology and mediation just as ODR. And I don't think Colin and Ethan had planned, or like they didn't want us to think about ODR in that limited way either. Like they think of it as more broadly too. So I think we just started putting in a bunch of different examples. And so that would be sitting, and so we tried to focus like at the table, what would that look like? It would be bringing the computer onto the table, pulling up information, doing analysis with that information, starting to engage with the Internet of Things, the Internet of Things being the use of technology that's embedded in some of our devices as a way to sort of collect even more information as it's happening during the mediation, to glean insights into what's happening for the parties as they're having this conversation. So we're trying to just shine a spotlight on different ways of thinking about technology in mediation beyond ODR. And that concentric circle, I think, Noam, I think you really came up with that visualization, but it helped us put a spotlight.
So there's a question in the chat that I want to kind of draw in here about impact of tech lowering costs, but what does it happen? What happens to the results? So, and I want to draw that question in to say, so what were the key arguments you were trying to make for why people should adopt this technology? Is it just cost savings? Is it actually quality of the service? Is it because of ethical obligations to stay current? I mean, there were there were at least 4 that I can recall off the top of my head. One more that I'm missing is that because the clients expect it, right? And and so forth. So give us a couple comments here on what was the punchline here in terms of why people should adopt this. Got the gap, but now why should I step over it, right?
So I think that's why at the beginning of this, I wanted to really highlight where Noam and I come from in the dispute resolution field, that it comes from this deep commitment and passion to dispute resolution and mediation. Because for us, the real reason why we should be bringing technology into or bring it to the mediation table is because of the party experience. We think it can enhance the party experience. So if clients might demand it, why might they demand it? They might demand it because their commercial client, their business is used to using data analytics to inform, not dictate, but inform their decision making. And here we are in a mediation saying, oh, you can't bring computers into the room. Or like it just doesn't make sense, right? Like we always use data as a way to make decisions. We should be bringing that in. We should be engaging as the mediators. We should be engaging that data and analysis with them that is done using technology for a more powerful analysis than we could do just by having a conversation with them. So we were really trying to focus on the experience and enhancing the effectiveness, not just something like efficiency. Right. So I would put a spotlight on that. Noam, what else?
Right. No, and what if you could, it's not just sort of expectations in that sense. We're used to technology, so let's look at technology. But what if, as technology develops, people actually start to think of it. What if you could come up with technology. And we're going to talk about some things. And I think, if there are whatever 80 or 100 people in the room, then there are 80 and 100 or 100 ideas that you could start churning out for how to improve one point. Maybe we'll get back to this later on, but like one point of the process with it. But imagine if you could use technology in a way that could either help you generate options or could just help you to visualize options that parties were throwing out, and to keep options visible in a way that they aren't when we sort of are scurrying between the table and a whiteboard. Or that can then group options quickly into 5 categories and let parties see that, or cluster them together in some other ways. In fact, in some ways that I think, Gary, I think some of your technology actually does some of this. But that's just visualizing one aspect of what it could do. So parties are given new tools to think about things. It's not about inventing a wheel. What we're talking about is generating and evaluating options. But we're doing it better. Will
So
it be better for everyone? Not necessarily, but we're talking about looking for ways to do it better in a way that I think, I don't know if I want to use the word stagnation or the words that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we haven't necessarily been trying to figure out a way to up our game to do an even better job than the awesome job that mediators are doing already.
Right.
Well, and sorry, to your point, Noam, like when clients come into the mediation room and they're used to using technology outside of the mediation room, and then we're telling them they can't, then why they might question using our services because we seem antiquated.
Right.
And so it also comes from a place of preservation. Preservation.
And let me top that. Let me top that. We topped that way back in 2019 by saying, and let's flip that, because these people are not only our clients, we're also talking about the next generation of mediators. Right. If you introduce mediation to the next generation of mediators as something in which technology is, it's beyond the pale, it's irrelevant. Not only, again, both we don't introduce it and maybe we even tamp it down, then I think there'll be a lot less enthusiasm. When we were writing this back then, we were saying, no, millennials aren't going to get into stuff that isn't, that isn't technologized. And here we are 5 years and 2 generations later. And that was a very real concern, that if mediation itself appeared to not just our clients, but our students or prospective trainees, if it appeared to them as something that was antiquated in that way, then maybe they wouldn't be excited to get into it in the first place. And there were either the field or aspects of this field or areas of this field could possibly wither. There was an existential concern.
Right. So real quick, what was the reaction to the article? So the article comes out, and other than mine, of course, which was wildly enthusiastic. What was the 2019, both academic and in the practice? What did you hear? What kind of feedback did you get?
I think it ranged. There was certainly one direct response to it from the symposium that sparked this discussion that was part of the AALS conference at the Association of American Law Schools conference, was, I think, pour some cold water on online dispute resolution, right? Bad, let's not do this. And brought up great arguments about the use of technology directed decision, technology made based decisions, not technology informed decisions. So there were some great psychological arguments against it, but it almost missed the point, because what we were trying to say is, no, this is still human first. It still came from, I worried it still came from that perspective that technologists, again, are all about the zeros and ones and aren't about the human. When I was at these conferences and presentations, the technologists and legal innovation folks were all about the human. In fact, let me just say, they don't put technology first. Like, I sort of worried when Noam and I were writing this, that if we put technology first, people are thinking we're just trying to sell technology for technology's sake. And that's not it. It is identify what the problem is, figure out what is causing that problem, and then look at different ways of solving it, but don't dismiss technology as a potential tool to solve it. And we're just trying to say that technology might be a tool to solve various problems that we're trying to highlight here and that we highlight in the article. And I think the other end of the responses to our article were people like you and other, at the time, startups in this mediation tech space, like Fourth Party and Level Headed, and who were like reaching out to us and saying, we've been trying to make this point and we needed your article as a way to give us, I don't know, support. I don't know.
Yeah.
You tell us, Gary.
I mean, that's exactly the way we took it. I mean, I probably handed out more copies of your article than you published, in other ways by sending out.
I'm sure.
And it was the argument for why I was building the product, right? Now, the interesting is that I really didn't, today commercially, there is still enough resistance to kind of the in the room stuff that as we built out ADR Notable, we defaulted back to case management because that everybody could understand, that there's less perception that it gets in the way of the human side of the practice. And honestly, some of our marketing tries to actually play down the components of our product that go into the room because that's not what people want to buy yet. So, which I think takes us to, okay, so what is your reaction about where we are today? I mean, I can tell you, from the commercial perspective, that I still perceive resistance. Do you? Where do you think we really are today, 5 years after you're having tried to promote this concept?
Well, I'll jump in here and say that you credit us at the beginning. You told us that we wrote this with foresight, and I'll go ahead and accept that. We wrote it with a hell of foresight. It turned out to be wrong because like Monty Python says, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. And in this case, the Spanish Inquisition was COVID. And of course, COVID came and really mixed things up, not mess things up, but it mixed things up. And so during COVID, just as one example, we were asked, like, what type of technology are we referring to? So here's the type of technology that we're mainly not referring to, which is using video conferencing in order to conduct mediation conference across. Okay, that had been done already. There was no lack of that, and the moment, more or less, like 8 minutes after we published the paper, you all were doing it. Whether you had resisted it before or had not resisted before, you were all doing it. We were all doing it. That was the only way to keep practice alive, and it turned out that it worked. And you could do it, and that very few people shut down their practices and said, "No, I can't justify taking money from clients for a technology-based process." It worked well enough, and different surveys and research that has been published since then showed that Zoom-based or video-based mediation works well enough. Clients like it enough. Lawyers like it enough. Mediators like it enough. There's no the rate of agreement, which is obviously the thing that's most often measured, does not drop when you do things online. There are certain suggestions that it might rise, and so in that sense, technology entered the world of mediation very quickly, very sharply, and very successfully. I don't mean that you all like it, okay? But very successful. I think you understand what I mean, very successfully. However, when I say that muddied the water, it muddied the water because, from our point of view, that's not what we had been talking about. And not only is that not what we had been talking about, rather we were talking about a different type of process support technology. Also, since we were no longer in rooms, and the only game in town was online, and the only tech online, the game was Zoom. So sort of that, there was sort of, I think that delayed some of the development of some of the types of in the room technology that we might start to think about. So that's sort of my, where are we 5 years later? There was a very odd route between when we wrote that and like, no one forecast that. We might be able to predict the next pandemic, but nobody predicted that one. And so, Alyson, before we start maybe talking about just brainstorming different types of technology that are certainly, that we could certainly envision today as being used in a mediation room. Anything to add about the looking back? Where are we today?
Well, I think one thing that to me definitely came true that I was surprised by is the use of more litigation analytics in the room. So in 2019, we were suggesting that clients and lawyers who are used to using data analytics to make decisions. Let me put this in very clear mediation terms. Lawyers come into a mediation and we ask them what their BATNA is. And if we're facilitative mediators, we ask a lot of questions and we want the parties and their lawyers to do that analysis. If we're evaluative mediators, we or we're facilitative and we're asked and have a whole conversation. But we are asked to do this case evaluation for the parties, comparing what would happen if they don't settle in the mediation. And in our paper, we talked about how mediators might use new tools out there called litigation analytics that are able to point to trends in courts to say, listen, in the thousands of cases that are in this database, not just the 1 or 100 or 1,000 cases that I've done as an individual mediator, but the tens of thousands in this database, when we look at the analysis that this database provides us and spits back and says, this is what's likely to happen in cases like this, we can, let me say that differently. Instead of the mediator providing that analysis, we can go to an external tool that has more data informing the analysis and more data informing the output that the parties can use instead. And so go back to where we started. What was the problem that this maybe addresses? It's not just that parties are looking for an evaluation. So here's an evaluation that's even more based on more data, so more likely, more accurate. But to me, that old debate about whether or not a mediator should or should not give an evaluation, all of a sudden this tool breaks that down and is like, well, I'm not giving the evaluation. I'm giving you access to an evaluation. And so now power imbalances between parties who do or do not have an attorney changes because they have access to this treasure trove of information to do their BATNA analysis. So the technology we're talking about and that we mentioned in the paper existed at the time. It has grown in use, and lawyers, because lawyers are increasingly using those litigation analytic tools, I have now been seeing more mediators use them and more presentations on it, including with ACR and at the ABA. So that to me is really exciting. There was an adoption of that, and maybe that's due to COVID and our familiarity with technology. Maybe that's just the growth of the push from Westlaw and Lexis for the lawyers to be using those tools. I don't know.
Right.
But, there were things, risk analysis, right? Back 100 years ago, when I was actually a trial lawyer, we were playing in the very rudimentary early days of trying to do some kind of decision tree analysis or risk analysis for the client that you could at least show them as, trying to pretend there was a science behind predicting the outcome of litigation, right? Which back in the day was mostly pretending. But it was a large document that you would have to do that had all these flows. And to your point, Alyson, and the point you were making, there are tools now where you can be led through a dialogue that is almost like TurboTax, and it helps you generate that kind of risk analysis. And anybody can do it. I mean, it used to require a lawyer paired with a PhD in decision science or something to do those. Today, they're much easier. There is a product, by the way, peacemaker.legal. I would recommend people take a look at that. It tries to embed a nice decision tree analysis type approach that you can use as a party all on your own, or it can be shared and made a part of the dialogue. And then there are other simpler tools like Noam was saying that you used to see the only technology was a whiteboard. Well, I mean, you can now do kind of digital whiteboard type things, or you can do just taking notes and trying to organize them more rapidly than you could possibly do on a yellow legal pad, and capturing, well, what are all the issues that the parties really have to resolve before they can get out of here today? Put those on front of somebody. You can start to actually mix and match them and put them in different sequence, link them to proposals that arise. And I mean, there's some that's just doing the same stuff you used to do on paper, more effectively communicated. This goes to the point, Alyson, you were making, the parallels between teaching and being a mediator. It's the communication more effectively using technology tools, than some static whiteboard or whatever. So they're different. There's some that are analytical. There's some that are more, just graphical, right, or visualization related. There may just be factual information confirmation that you could do in a split second now, right? That you couldn't do if cell phones were banned and nobody had a computer in the room, right? And you needed confirmation of a particular fact that was relevant. You're done. So.
And so one way to come up with like what technology could be helpful is to look at what problems exist and what could solve them. And so Alyson's example, an example of let's look at the big problems, that have been plaguing us since the first person, tried to settle some dispute outside a cave. Like, should the mediator be neutral and what does that mean? Right. And so take down the top level challenges and see how working for a technological asset or a technological support in some way can either resolve that or take some of the heat off of it, or just make it not the mediator's burden in some way or another. Another way is just to look at what's going wrong. Right. Like, so I think, Gary, like when you shared some of the, I remember way back you were telling us about like how you were inspired to start ADR Notable, which has started out as a note-taking software, is because you felt that there was something about the way that mediators gathered information and what they did with it that wasn't smooth. It's not going smooth. And as I mentioned, I've been in long sessions where people just debated, should we be writing stuff down as parties talk to us? And there's, well, no, you don't want to break eye contact, or yeah, but then you'll forget the information, but wait, my memory isn't that good. And we have these long discussions, and it might be that for some people, a note-taking tool that you can then do different stuff with. I'm part of the school that does take notes and in a certain way, and then I can't read them afterwards because my handwriting is indecipherable. And that's another problem. I don't know whether I need to work that out here, but it's a problem that technology could solve. So there's another way to saying, what technology could we invent and what can we use? And I want to focus on this term invent, because most of the technology that we're talking about, that we've been asked to talk about and now to demonstrate, most of the technology that we're talking about does not yet exist. But it's not that far away, and there are some that any of you could come up with. I came up with just as an idea, as we were talking about this yesterday, I came up with an idea that I then played around with, and it worked pretty well. Which was to ask parties after I've heard each party's side, and we've had some conversation, asked some questions, and we've reached that stage. And then I would ask parties, which is a phase this is a stage or a technique that I don't currently use in my mediation practice. But what if at this point I would ask parties, okay, so now that we've heard all that we've heard, let me ask you in a sentence or two or three, what are we here for, or what are you here for, depending on how I felt that was the right framing. Now, tell me the story that brought you here, but in a much abridged story of why you're here and what you hope to achieve. And then I ask the other party the same thing. And then I input that into, let's say, ChatGPT, which was what I used yesterday. And I asked them, I explained to ChatGPT what my notion of taking two disparate stories and putting them into a shared story is. If you don't use this technique in your own mediation, A, that's fine. And B, you can more or less invent it on the spot based on those words that I just used, okay? It has a lot more we's than I's, but there's more to it. And so after a very rudimentary teaching of ChatGPT of what I mean by a shared story, I said, so take these two paragraphs that's said by party A and party B and craft a shared story. And, and keep it to X, I could give it different parameters. And then I could also say, craft 10 different shared stories. And so from this point, you can also think, what can I do with this material? So I could ask, I could ask parties to read this. It would take 3 minutes of reading, and to choose 3 that speak to them. Okay, I'm not sure quite what I would do with this yet, but what I do know is that right now, the the process. In my work, it's usually at a particular stage in the process. The process of forming a shared story, offering it to parties, hearing what they think of it, and at some point getting them to sort of circle around and nod at a shared story that they both identify with. It, 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 it's all dependent on me and my creative mode and my understanding of the information and my narrative abilities in the moment, which thankfully usually works, but I'm sure that it's not always the best. And I do know that I often miss it because parties saying no, that's not it at all. And so in my process, I know that, okay, then I take a step back, I ask some more questions and I work with it, and then I do it again. But here's another way to approach that whole issue that might lead to creating new either process stages or process moves that I had never considered before. And now I'd like you all to think about your own processes. You know, again, if there are 80, 100 mediators in the room, there are 80, 100 ways of conducting mediation. And you'll think about that one thing. And and when I say that they're not that far in the future, some of these, Gary had to hire software engineers and program, this whole case management thing and note-taking thing and everything. But ChatGPT also offers us certain things that you can just really just ask them, hey, can you do this? And they'll say, yeah, just give me the information and I'll do it. And so we can all figure this out. It's a much more democratic approach to figuring out technology and mediation.
One point I just want to quickly address too, if you've suggested this invent kind of concept, but I have to say, I'm finding there are many of these technologies are there. They're just not being applied in dispute resolution yet.
That's true too.
So you can often go see something and say, oh my gosh, that I get it over there. Why are we not incorporating it over here? And my biggest example of that is my fascination with emotion AI and the capability of these devices now to actually look at a human's face, watch facial expression, listen to voice, tone, volume, speed of word choice, look at skin coloration, whether I'm blushing or getting a reddening. I mean, they can take all these factors into account in a split second and spit out what emotion is that person likely experiencing. And that, it's not in our space. It's not being applied in the space yet, but it is out there. I think frankly, it's a little rudimentary still. I've played with it. I'll drop into the chat if you want to go play with one that's for free that you can go mess around with. There it is. But I think, I would encourage people not to think of the hurdle of inventing stuff so much as looking around in their day-to-day life and the technology you use in other contexts. Like, as Alyson said, look, at work, half these clients are using tools to analyze and make decisions, just informing them, capturing large amounts of data, processing it into something that produces some usable perspective or advice or visualization. And then they make a human decision based on the additional information and knowledge they've been provided by the technology. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that should be wrote. Alyson, I got one question before we move to the future. Okay, so the door got kicked open by COVID and
Right.
at least the adoption of video conferencing, as we're all experiencing now. What about what do you think about today? Is there still, the Gene Sternlick Coldwater article? Is there still a lot of resistance to the use of technology other than communications and case management? I mean, this kind of stuff in the room to inform a decision-making or process or a reasoning process. What do you think? 5 years later, are we still fighting the fight, or did the kicking the door open off to the right a little bit, really open the door to the adoption of new technologies?
I think it's open. I mean, there's still resistance. There's just a chat message about some of the resistance and people are still experiencing, but the door is open. Whether or not people have walked through or walking through confidently, maybe not, but the door is open and people are more curious about what's possible. So COVID forced our hand. And I think when we think about the theory of change, once individuals have adopted, once you have enough people who have adopted, all of a sudden we go over this curve, and it's just sort of becomes the norm. And video conferencing has become the norm because we're forced hand, and now even if it's not forced, we're still using it, like here, when it can create more opportunities. So more people can attend this than if we were in person. When ChatGPT came out in, when the public version of ChatGPT came out and people started talking about it, which I think was like fall 2022, I remember Noam posted something on the dispute resolution legal educators listserv, where he was playing around with ChatGPT, this generative AI tool, and put in the ugly orange simulation that a lot of us have done in our initial mediation trainings or negotiation trainings, just to see what AI would do. And I was shocked that the response to Noam doing that wasn't shocked that Noam did it. Like, hello, of course he's interested in this and is going to play around with it. But the response to Noam doing it was interest, curiosity. What can I do with this? And then all of a sudden, all of these people who might have been like anti-technology, they were writing poems on ChatGPT. And I was like, okay, this is hilarious. May not necessarily be the mediation use, but is definitely the walking through the door of a certain kind. Was just at the University of Missouri for their 40th anniversary symposium. And at the end of one of the panels, Andrea Schneider starts talking about the power of data and how the more our mediations are taking place online, the more data that's out there, these things are going to create an opportunity for us, an opportunity that's going to help inform future decision making, not only decision making in the mediation, but decision making about policy in mediation, decision making maybe in the law. So I've been exploring with some computer scientists this cryptography protocol that encrypts data before it's analyzed, which allows us to maintain the confidentiality of the data, which is like, right, a very important value of ours, maintain the confidentiality of the data while still aggregating it and computing an output that the public can use. And now we go to the old settlement debate from 40 years ago about whether or not settlement is good or bad. Because the public either needs information or individuals need or desire privacy. And instead of looking at it as this zero-sum mindset, you can have one or the other, not both, we can look at solutions that are more integrative where we can have both. So the door's open, the technology is emerging, the curiosity is there. But I think to the other comment in the chat of like, show us what this looks like, we don't have full adoption. We don't have full comfort yet. There's curiosity, but not necessarily yet comfort than adoption, I guess I would say.
Okay, so in the last 5 minutes or so we have here, tell us, just pretend we have now time traveled 5 more years into the future and we're having this exact same conversation. What do you think 10 years after Mind the Gap we will be talking about? Is it, or can I look back at this stage and say we were chiseling on stone tablets relative to what we're doing 5 years from now? Are we going to have robot mediators? So just, forget the human, let's just let ChatGPT make the decision. What do you think? Let's do the.
I can go first and say that, yeah, to some extent, it'll be chiseling on the stone. We are chiseling on the stones. I'm speaking with ACR GNY now. Tomorrow I'm actually flying to New York City where there's the Cardozo Journal of Dispute Resolution Annual Symposium. And one of the panels the panel that I'm on is about, of course, mediation and technology. Is technology going to be, part of the process of awakening mediation to its true promise? And honestly, it's to some extent, I feel like I'm traveling, 700 miles in order to say, yeah, I think so. I don't know really, but it's going to be awesome when it gets here. And mainly to say the point that what we are seeing now is just the infancy or the gestation period of the whatever of the next technological step. In the 2 years since Alyson mentioned, since the public version of ChatGPT, leapt into our awareness, Those models have developed exponentially, far more powerful and, proliferated. There are dozens, hundreds, more powerful, more specific, more all sorts of things, and far more user-friendly as they go along. And people now are at the stage where we're starting to ask technology, how can we build better technology? Can you build better technology for us, technology? And we're sort of into that exponential building of it. And so when you ask to cast 5 years into the future, okay, 5 years is sort of kind of doable. If you look for 10 years in the future, I'd say like don't even try. But I will say that, just as I said before, that each one of you could now come up with something that's been troubling you in your process, or just a point, that's interesting to you in your process, and you ask yourself, with the tools that I know how to use now, what solution, it doesn't have to be the best solution, what solution could technology offer us? If we got used to thinking that way, then in 5 years, we will know just how chiseling on the stones we were today.
I just had a slightly comical experience preparing for another presentation in a week or so with pi.ai. If anybody's tried that one, it's just pi.ai. It is a downloadable app for your phone, and it was the first tool I ever used that was fully voice activated. So you just chat with it. You literally, like a best friend over a beer. And I was playing around with it, and I said, well, can you recognize emotions by voice? And it said, well, yes, I can. As a matter of fact, we have algorithms which can tell by how loud somebody's speaking and speed and all this other stuff. And I said, well, can you tell me how I might use that as a mediator in a session? And I don't know if you'd ever really do this, but it launched off in this discussion of using an earpiece where it was literally like whispering in your ear, giving you feedback about the emotional reactions of participants in a room with a microphone that it could hear. I'm not ready to go there. Don't get me wrong, but it was an amazing response of asking the tool itself how it could help me do things, and it spurs some interesting thought.
Well, Gary, so I want to use that as a jumping off point just to comment on a couple of the questions, because two things. So one, what you're demonstrating is interacting with AI to further some ideas. So it's presenting ideas based on your prompts, and then how are you going to use it? And you bring it into the mediation room, and you're being given this information, but it is still you deciding what to do with that information. So Harry sort of asked, like, what do we do with AI as making these decisions? And the best use of AI is not having AI make the decision. The best use of AI is when we provide it content and we ask for its assistance. And so as a mediator, if I'm using any of these tools, litigation analytic tools or AI or anything, it is now what? So we've done this analysis using whatever tool. Here's this information. What do you want to do with that? And the technologists actually comment all the time about the importance of emotional intelligence in humans, the human component to the use of these tools, and say that we are going to be needed even more in our counseling and problem solving and supporting roles, as opposed to our telling and doing roles with clients. So we're going to have to, hey, client, this is the information. How does that make you feel? What resonates with you? What doesn't resonate with you, and why? We're good at that. That's like our bread and butter as mediators. So I don't think that we're going to have robot mediators, but I think mediators who don't use AI are going to, or don't use these tools, are going to become less successful. Maybe not in 5 years, but in a few years. And then I just have to highlight Astrid's comment that, of course, we do need to be careful that bias is built into a lot of these tools. And so with any of these tools, yes, we need to be asking the critical questions in their implementation. I just find that our field too often focuses only on the critical components, so that then we don't even explore the tools or explore how we can make those tools better to address those critical issues. And bias is a huge one for sure.
Okay, I think we're out of time, so I want to just do a quick closing here of if you thought the gap that was identified 5 years ago was too big to step over, I hope that today's conversation has shown you that in fact the gap is something we could all manage to bridge today, and that we are all adopting and using tools in our everyday lives that are pretty advanced and help us do a myriad of things. A little bit of thought and a little bit of creativity might actually bring many of those into the room and make them equally useful and beneficial, not only for the practitioners, but for the people that we, the practitioners, are serving as well, both meeting their expectations and I think meeting the quality and the outcome objectives that we have. So with that, I want to thank these two great panelists. It's so much fun to work with them and talk to them and hear them tell the story of this article. I'm sure either of them would be happy to have you reach out to them. They're easily located in any case. And I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And Elise, once again, thanks to ACRGNY for being the sponsor of this organization and this presentation. Really quickly, there's a question for email addresses for the two of you, if you guys wouldn't mind dropping your emails into the chat before we close. That'd be great.
Thank you, everybody. This was wonderful. Gary, thank you so much. Alyson, always a pleasure.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you all on behalf of ACRGNY. Thank you everybody who came. I hope this was an interesting and engaging conversation for you. I know it was for me. And yeah, there seems to be this is obviously a hot topic issue. I see so many questions have been coming in and conversations happening in the chat. So let us know. We're going to be sending out a survey after this. Please let us know what you'd like to hear more about on this topic or other topics that are really relevant to you in your practice. We definitely want to make sure that we are bringing great programs like this to all of our members, as our world changes. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye.